Hello, Rabbi Brody. How are you?
Great to be with you.
Likewise. How was your day?
So far, so good. It's been pretty good.
Good, good. Okay, for the sake of people who've already started joining us, I suggest we just start.
Sounds great.
Okay, so hello, everyone. My name is Mirit Hoffman. I'm an elder law lawyer and a gerontologist, and my focus is helping senior citizens when they reach significant junctions in their life. I'm talking about estate planning, which is mainly wills, enduring power of attorneys, guardianship issues, and I also focus on financial agreements when we reach second or third relationships. And from my broad exposure with this age group, I realized that there's a lot of other issues which concern the elderly, and therefore I decided that they need to be addressed because not everybody knows about them. And so I've created this podcast called Golden Topics, Significant Crossroads for Seniors, where I have conversations with other professionals that deal with or work with senior citizens on critically important issues that directly impact their life. And today we're going to be talking about Jewish law and end of life decisions with Rabbi Dr. Shlomo Brody, who is the Executive Director of Imatai. So, first of all, thank you very much, Rabbi Brody, for joining us. And please introduce yourself.
Okay, great. Thank you so much. This is such a wonderful initiative that you have. I live in Israel. I've lived here actually for 24 years, but I run an organization called Matai, which is US based. I got interested in these topics regarding end of life care and aging in my youth, actually, in Houston, Texas, where my father, of blessed memory, Professor Baruch Brody, was the chairman of bioethics at Baylor College of Medicine for 40 years. So, as I tell people, my bar mitzvah drasha was about abortion and suicide and Jewish thought, which is a little bit nuts, but I did have a happy, childhood. People are always ask me that. So, but I've always been interested in these issues, and Imatai, as an American organization that works across the world, is very much interested in helping Jews navigate these very complex, ethical and halachic and emotional issues related to end of life care and aging.
That's amazing. Okay, so let's just start straight away. So, talk to me a little bit about the major differences between end of law decisions in the US, Canada, and in Israel, because that's a very hot topic here.
It's a hot topic everywhere around the world. And I think that I'd say that the biggest difference is that the US and Canada, and for that matter, most Western countries, are largely governed by a principle of personal autonomy, meaning the laws are meant to allow people to have a lot of choice in what they do or don't want when it comes to end of life care in particular, but in general in their healthcare treatments. In the Canada, this includes even allowing for euthanasia. In the United States, at least in 10 states and Washington, D.C., this includes physician assisted suicide. And so there's a lot of broad leverage that people have when it comes to these issues. Here in Israel, Israel is governed when it comes to these issues under a law called a Chok Lamut, the dying patient law. It was passed in 2005 after a committee made up of 59 people. Amazing how that worked.
Right.
And this law is very unique in Western countries because it's much more restrictive in what is allowed and not allowed under the strong influence of Jewish law of Halacha. And so while there's certain choices that people can make and are allowed to make decisions of what they would or wouldn't want, there are restrictions. I think the most notable one is in the Western societies, we see this on TV all the time. We're allowed to do what's known as palliative extubation, remove a ventilator, pull the plug, so to speak. And in Israel, that's simply not allowed under law when it is believed that this will cause the patient to soon afterwards die. And there are other differences as well, but I think it's reflective of a much larger ethos and a much different orientation with regard to end of life care and the law.
Okay. So let's just dwell into the actual documents. There's three documents from the Ministry of Health that deal with making instructions for your end of life medical decisions. Um, so tell us a little bit about the options that exist and why did MSI feel that they need to get involved with that?
Yeah, sure. So, as a part of the Israeli dying patient law, Israel actually didn't have what's known as advanced healthcare directives or formal living wills until 2005. Again, it was very much different than much of the West.
Right.
And in order to address a lot of the court cases that were coming up of patients who wanted or usually didn't want certain types of interventions, Israel created a few different documents that help people designate a power of attorney or a durable power of attorney or a proxy or an agent. It's called all different things, yipoy koach, which will allow people to make decisions. And particularly in the area of interest of our organization, help people designate who should make these decisions when a patient is deemed to be terminally ill, which, as you know, under Israeli law means they have a diagnosis of living less than 6 months or less. So
Right.
this is very important that a person should have the option of designated who should speak on their behalf. If you don't do this, it creates all sorts of chaos or uncertainty about who should be making these important decisions. The documents also allow a bit of a directive option where people can say when there's less than 6 months to live, right, which always, of course, is the best guesstimate. But when I'm deemed to be in this situation, I would or would not want a number of different types of interventions. And there are different versions of this, but it gives a lot of different, very explicit types of medical interventions chemotherapy and radiation and CPR and intubation and a whole slew of other issues which people can choose from on these documents. But these documents were, have been available in Hebrew, not such a user-friendly form, which usually an attorney will help people fill out. And the English translation of these was
Difficult.
less than perfect. Let's put it
Yeah.
that way, right? Let's be
Okay.
positive. And so Matai decided that we're going to translate these documents and make them available to the broader Israeli public, particularly with the Anglo-Israeli public, so that way people can have proper access to these documents.
Okay. So what is the advantage of this new bilingual Ematai document?
Well, first of all, it's just user friendly in the sense that it's a clear and clean image and much more just friendly to fill out. I mean, the boxes make sense, and but that, we joke around about it, but it makes a big difference when you're filling out a form to have clear, explicit instructions, including visual guides, helps a lot. And I think that the second biggest advantage here is it just pushes people to say, okay, this is something we can actually do. Whereas this is something we can do and should do. In some cases, it can be done by yourself. Many cases, you need a professional, like a lawyer, like yourself, to do it with the person. But it's really by making it accessible, by putting in the language of the first language of people of English as well. It just says to people, you know what, this is something I can do. I know need to do this. Everyone sort of understands. Yeah, this is something I probably should do. But you need that push. You need a societal push, and you need a little bit of a tools to make it possible.
100%. I can say from my clients after I've introduced this document that they were happier, if you can say happy to this, to fill it out because they felt more confident that they can actually do it. Um, Also, it's important that you express that fact that it's acceptable. These documents, although you guys prepared it, is acceptable by the Ministry of Health as a formal document, meaning whoever fills it out will be accepted as if it was the regular document from the Ministry of Health, correct?
Yes, we worked very hard to make sure that would be approved. And when we have certain, it's also in Hebrew, right? It is in Hebrew as well. It's a bilingual document to make sure that everyone who's reading these documents also understands what we're referring to. And we give instructions. There are certain parts where it really should be completed in Hebrew, basic Hebrew, right? It's a basic any Israeli citizen should be able to complete. But all at least the instructions and the questions are given in English to make this a usable document.
Okay. Um, I have a question. Why has MIT made this whole advanced planning a priority? Like, what role does the organization play in these forms to make it more accessible to the Jewish community around the world?
Yeah, I mean, we do this, of course, this model we're discussing is in Israel, but we have a model that works in America and Canada and the UK as well. And we're working on an Australian model now. And I think the reason is that healthcare today can keep people alive for a very long time, but not necessarily preserving what we sometimes call quality of life or not necessarily preventing pain and suffering. And there are many times when people are in situations when they can no longer make decisions for themselves. That could be because they can't communicate. It could be because they have a certain element of dementia or they're unconscious, whatever it might be.
Right.
And we all have sort of seen this with different people. We see it now on TV, both our loved ones. We've experienced the difficulty of making these decisions. And it's just so important for people to give a little bit of clarity on these issues. And there have been different models out there. The model that we have taken is to create a legal proxy, power of attorney, yipoi koach, to designate and say, okay, who should speak on your behalf? And this is so important. You get in a situation, someone can have, let's say, three kids. They have different personalities, they have different backgrounds, they've had different conversations. They get in the hospital room and no one's been designated as the power of attorney. The doctors say, okay, who's making the decision here? And either no one knows, or they all think they should, or they all disagree about it, and it just causes a tremendous amount of angst. So the purpose of filling these documents out in advance is to prevent that type of strife and to create that type of clarity. But of course, if you just designate someone and say, okay, you're going to make these decisions, the first thing they're going to have to think about in the moment of truth is, well, what do I think mom or dad or my sister or brother or whatever it might be would want in these circumstances? And so one of the things that we've tried to do is to create a conversation guide, which we have now both in English and in Hebrew, which allows people to talk about their general values and preferences. It doesn't get into the details of in situation X, I want you to do Y or not Z, right? That doesn't get into medical jargon, but instead just gives some general guides of questions, conversation starters about how you feel about pain management or what you may or may not want. And if you have, like, let's say, advanced brain injury or dementia, just some basic types of questions that will help start the conversation. So that way, when the person you've designated gets to the moment of truth, they can feel like they had a bit of knowledge about what you'd want in this circumstance. And because many people in Israel care about Jewish law, halacha, even if they're not fully observant in their regular life, but they care about this when it comes to life cycle events and end of life decision making. We try to create this in a halachically sensitive manner, including an option for people to designate a rabbi that people can consult with. So once again, it can create some clarity on these really difficult issues.
Do you have any examples of people that approached you, used the documents, had conversations with you that you can share with us on that?
Oh, I mean, I can tell you that what's really shocked me since we introduced these documents is how much relief it provides to people. I mean, I remember a woman called me up. She's in her 50s. She's got living parents, one's 90, one's 85. And she took the documents and she went and filled them out with her parents. And she just called them up like on a Sunday morning and said, okay, mom, dad, I'm coming over. Like, we need to talk about this. And the parents, it turns out, had also been thinking about the fact that they really need to talk about this, but they just didn't have the tools or someone initiating that conversation. And she told me afterwards how relieved they all felt, having created some clarity. Unfortunately, this woman's father passed away several months later. He had been relatively healthy at the time, but he was 90, and things happen. And she said to me that they just feel a tremendous amount of comfort in knowing that they feel, I believe correctly, that they fulfilled his wishes in the moment of truth. So that I feel is a very rewarding story and a feel good story in that respect. But
Yeah.
we've had other cases where people call us up. MIT is the Robert and Baron Medical Halacha Helpline. It's a 24/7 consultation helpline. People can call us. And someone called me up and said, it's a family of four siblings. A couple are in Israel, a couple are in America. The parent was in Israel, had advanced dementia and advanced Parkinson's, not a great combination. And the question that was going to be posed to them soon is about an artificial feeding tube. And they want to know, are we required by Jewish law to do this? What's the ethical thing to do? And the thing I asked them, of course, is, okay, well, what do you think your parent would have wanted in this situation? Perhaps you talked about it when they initially got the diagnosis of dementia or Parkinson's. And their answer is no, we never talked about these things. And I'm not blaming anyone because, these things are difficult, but it's one of those stories that highlighted for me how if you don't have these conversations when you need to and get these papers and affairs in order ahead of time, you're really setting yourself up for a lot of angst and difficult decision-making process.
Absolutely. Are there any misconceptions or concerns people have regarding completing these documents? And if so, how do you address them if they come up?
Yeah, I mean, I think a lot of people just have this misconception that, you talk about death, it's going to happen. Right? In the religious terms, this can be, we're Pitchon Pele Satan, we're opening the door for Satan,
Right,
or an
right,
Ayin
right,
Hara, an
right,
evil eye, or whatever it might be. I mean, there's all sorts of ways in
right.
which we don't like talking about these things. This isn't only a Jewish or Israeli phenomenon, of course. This is true around the world. But certainly you see that, people feel this discomfort about it. I think also there's a more um, you know, concrete concern that it's hard for people to actually know what they'd want or wouldn't want. And I think that's actually legitimate in the following sense. You could be filling this out, you're 70, you're relatively healthy, and you have no idea where your healthcare journey is going to take you. And so, that's why we favor the model, certainly, though, of at least creating clarity about who should make decisions on your behalf of the ipoi koach, of the proxy, and that at least you can provide some form of general conversation and values and preferences, even if you opt not to elect, fill out an advanced directive with detailed instructions. But if you feel like you do know what you would want and want to give that clarity, or feel that'll be helpful to your family members or your loved ones, then yeah, it's really possible, especially when you sit down with a skilled attorney like yourself or with a doctor or someone else who has knowledge, information about these issues to complete these documents. And it's doable. But I always stress to people that it's important to review these documents on a regular basis to make sure that they're updated with who you'd want to speak on your behalf and for your preferences. And in fact, in Israeli law, which is somewhat unique around the world, some of these documents are no longer valid after 5 years, meaning you
Correct.
have to renew them. And it's an important, factor to keep in mind.
I think that's actually very important that they expire every 5 years because, as you know, medicine evolves. So, their decisions that they had at the beginning might be in 5 years' time completely different, and in 10 years' time again different. So, yeah, I think that's actually an important thing. How can people ensure that their preferences are honored when the time comes, really?
Yeah, I mean, it's difficult because, we don't know where we're going to be headed for, and we don't know who this person is that's going to make these decisions. But the most important thing is to find someone in your life who you trust, who you feel you have a valued relationship, you trust their judgment, you trust their ability to advocate on your behalf, and most importantly, you trust their ability to honor your wishes. And we all have different people in our lives who we might have different types of relationships with, but you really want to think about on these issues for this particular purpose, this task. Who do I think is best to fulfill this goal? People can sometimes have family members, all of whom they love, but are better at these types of situations, hospital situations, or medical situations, or pressure situations. It could be someone who's very different, by the way, than your proxy with regard to financial matters. I have a colleague who said that my mom made me the healthcare power of attorney, but my sister the financial power of attorney, which reflects our strengths. So that's one thing to keep in mind. Sometimes also religious differences can be a factor as well. We had a case where someone called us up. They had like 5 kids, three of whom are Haredi. They were religious Zionists. One other kid was religious Zionist, and the fifth kid was non-observant. And they decided that they didn't want the Haredi children to be put in the place of doing what they wanted under Jewish law, but they felt that those children were going to have hard time respecting those requests. That's not always the case. The religious differences matter, and you have to figure out for yourself based on who you've got in your life to make those decisions. And I'd say the other thing that we really stress, and there are different options for this in Israeli documents, is to have multiple people who are authorized in case of need. We favor the model, I know how you feel about this when you read, but we favor the model of having one primary person and then alternates in case that person isn't around. Because, sometimes people aren't available, they're on vacation. They've gone off to Dubai, they're in America, whatever it might be. And when that moment of truth comes around, if they're not here, they're not available, who's next? Who's next on deck? And so I think it's important for people to, if they really want to make sure that someone's going to advocate for them and reflect their values, should have multiple people involved in this process.
I totally agree. I was just going to say my 2 cents on that. I had a client where she's actually in very good relations with all of her kids, and some were observant, some were not observant, but that wasn't the point at all. But she said, my daughter, she had 3 sons, I think. One daughter said, my daughter really gets me. And therefore, of all the children who I love and respect and everything, is the one who gets me. I can count on her regarding these decisions because we've had multiple discussions, which you, anyways, very much think is an important thing, and I do as well. And she had multiple discussions with her, and she was just sort of testing the water with her. And she found that every time she brought something up, the daughter was really on her wavelength regarding what she would have done as well. So that's what made her decide that actually she's going to choose this daughter because she really feels that if the time comes and she can't make decisions on her own, she'll be her person in that respect. So
Yeah, very important. And the other thing I'd add, though, is it's important to tell your family who you've designated. Because if you show up in the hospital and one person was designated and the other kids are like surprised and shocked, that can also lead to a lot of bad dynamics. I'll
absolutely.
tell you a funny story, though, is that I remember once someone told me, yeah, my daughter, she feels like me, as like you were saying beforehand, but she never answers her phone. She never answers my calls. So I told her, I'm not naming you as my power of attorney because you don't answer the calls and I might need you. And that actually got her daughter to start answering her calls in general. So you never
Oh,
know how it's going to impact.
so that worked. That worked. I know you sort of touched upon conversations, but are there specific conversations that people should be having with their potential appointed decision makers? Like specific things
Well,
you can think of?
of course, it depends a little bit where you are in your healthcare journey. I mean, if you already have a diagnosis or you have something already going on, it can be a little bit more concrete, of course. But I think that there are some just general types of preferences that you should indicate. I'll give you a classic example. Many people, they might say at certain points, I would forego an intervention, but if we had a family simcha, if we had a family happy occasion, a wedding, a bat mitzvah, whatever it might be coming up, I'd really want you to make sure, do what you can to get me there. It actually has a lot of implications. And so, that's the type of thing I think people should talk about a little bit. And I also think people need to reflect upon not just healthcare decisions, but also decisions that might involve, where you're going to live, especially if you have dementia or some other, significant limitation. And it's important to get those topics out there ahead of time and to get the legal documents prepared for this. And we had a case recently where someone consulted with us where, their mother had, sort of mid-level, mid-stage dementia. They didn't have the documents, power of attorney documents in place properly. And it was really preventing them from being able to take care of their mom and they just hadn't, set these things up ahead of time, really to everyone's detriment. So, it's important to anticipate a little bit of some of these types of decisions, and you can use amortized documents and, of course, consultation with lawyers like yourself to make sure you have everything in place.
Absolutely. I totally understand that. And I advocate for that as well. That's already the enduring power of attorney, which I very much believe is a necessary document when you're thinking about planning ahead. So absolutely. What else does Amitai offer their audience? What else should we be turning to Amitai for?
Yeah, I mean, besides these types of documents, which is a critical tool, we offer a number of other educational tools on our website with lectures. As I mentioned, we have this 24/7 helpline, which people can reach us at if they have immediate concern or consultation. Many times, though, people are calling us to set up in advance. Mom's in this situation or dad's in this situation, or I'm thinking about one thing or another, and I would like to talk to you, in a prepared, calm manner in terms of dealing with those types of issues. And so we offer a lot of those types of consultation and educational activities. We also have a little bit of like a spiritual element to our site and to our activities. We offer a lot of prayers that people can say for themselves, for loved ones, because I think that one of the things we have to think about is we want to confront our mortality in a very positive, meaningful manner. I mean, it's one of those inevitable things of life. And I think Jewish wisdom has a lot of insights and tools in terms of addressing this. Unfortunately, for cultural reasons, we do mourning of Elut very well. We have Shiva and Shloshim and all these things. When it comes to mortality, we're not as good. And so one of the things that Amatai is trying to do is to make this confrontation with mortality much more meaningful. We offer workshops and tools how to write an ethical will or some form of, last letter in which you give some form of spiritual, emotional, intellectual, value-based types of, teachings they like on to pass on to people.
That's really important. That's really important. Okay, well, how can people reach you? Give us just a quick of how people can reach you.
The best way, amatai.org is our website, and it's got all of the ways to connect to us, including the Robert M. Barron Medical Halacha Consultation Helpline, the WhatsApp, the emails. That's really the best way to reach us. And like I said, we answer questions 24/7. And the reason is that these issues come up 24/7. But ultimately, the goal is to create a situation where you're not having to make decisions in a panic mode, but you have things prepared in advance. And that's why we call the organization Ematai. It comes from the teaching and ethics of our fathers. If not now, when? Im lo achshav, Ematai. I mean, what are you waiting for? And now's the time to get these things in order and to plan what you can. We can't plan everything in life, but we should plan what we can.
Oh, I like that ending. We cannot plan anything in life, but we should plan what we can. I think that's great. I think that's great. I totally agree with that on that optimistic note. Thank you very, very much, Rabbi Brody, for being with us tonight. Thank you for the people who are watching. Have a good night. Stay safe. And I'm looking forward to seeing you in my next podcast. Goodbye. Bye.